Hi, I'm Emily. If you told me a year ago that my best friend, Claire, would become the reason I question everything, my sanity, my morals, even my safety, I would have laughed. Claire was my rock, my sister in every way but blood. But now, I don't even know who she is anymore. Or maybe I never really knew her at all. Let me start from the beginning. Claire and I met in college. She was the fearless one, always pulling me into her world of spontaneity and adventure. We were inseparable, two halves of the same whole. Over the years, we shared everything: heartbreaks, promotions, late-night confessions over wine. I trusted her with my life. And then I met James, her husband. James. Handsome, confident, with that magnetic charm that could fill a room. When Claire introduced us, I thought, finally, she's found someone who truly deserves her. He seemed perfect, a textbook Prince Charming. But, as they say, appearances can be deceiving. It started small. The first time I noticed James looking at me differently, I told myself I was imagining it. We were at Claire's birthday party, and as I reached for a glass of champagne, I caught him watching me. Not a casual glance, but something deeper. Intense. It made my skin crawl, but I brushed it off. He was probably just distracted. Right? Then there were the compliments. Not the kind you'd expect from your best friend's husband. "You're looking stunning tonight, Emily." Absolutely radiant. Claire was right there, laughing, oblivious. And I smiled awkwardly, chalking it up to harmless flattery. But it didn't stop. One night, Claire invited me over for dinner. It was just the three of us, and for a while, everything felt normal. We laughed, shared stories, reminisced about our wild college days. But when Claire stepped out to take a phone call, James leaned in closer. "Emily," he said, his voice low, "you know, I've always thought you were special. Different." I froze. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. That unsettling tone, like there was more he wanted to say but didn't dare. When Claire came back, I excused myself to the bathroom, heart pounding in my chest. Was I overthinking this? Was he just being friendly? The next day, I got a text from an unknown number. "Watch your back. You're not safe." I stared at my phone, trying to steady my shaking hands. Who would send me something like that? Was it a joke? A mistake? I didn't tell Claire. How could I? What would I even say? "Hey, your husband's acting weird, and now I'm getting creepy texts." She'd laugh it off. Or worse, she wouldn't believe me. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind raced. Little moments I dismissed came flooding back. The time James, accidentally, brushed my arm. The way he lingered too close when he spoke to me. The odd tension in his voice when Claire wasn't around. But what if I was wrong? What if this was all in my head? Then came the incident that changed everything. It was another dinner, this time at their place with a few mutual friends. Claire was radiant, playing the perfect hostess. James was his usual charming self, but there was something different in the air, something I couldn't quite place. Later, when everyone had left, Claire went to bed early, exhausted. James and I stayed behind to clean up. As I reached for a dish, I felt his hand on my wrist. "Emily," he said softly, too softly. I tried to pull away, but he didn't let go. "James, don't," I whispered, panic setting in. He stepped closer, his hand tightening slightly, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I know you feel it too. Don't pretend you don't." I yanked my arm away and bolted for the door. My heart was racing as I ran down the hallway, his words echoing in my ears. The next morning, I texted Claire, asking if we could talk. I didn't know what I was going to say or how, but I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. Before I could send it, my phone buzzed again. Another anonymous text. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." The morning after James cornered me, I couldn't focus on anything. My phone sat on the table, the anonymous message glaring back at me like a warning. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. I didn't. I didn't have a clue. I wanted to tell Claire everything. I rehearsed the conversation in my head a dozen times. But every scenario ended the same way, with Claire laughing, rolling her eyes, or worse, getting angry at me. After all, what proof did I have? A gut feeling? A few weird texts. But then James had grabbed my wrist. And I couldn't shake the look in his eyes. Still, I hesitated. Because part of me didn't want to believe it. James was Claire's husband. Claire's everything. How could I destroy that for her without absolute certainty? By midday, I convinced myself to let it go. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe I'd overreacted. I was just starting to breathe again when my phone buzzed. Another anonymous message. Be careful who you trust. My stomach dropped. This time, it wasn't vague. It wasn't a warning, it was a threat. That evening, Claire called, her voice light and cheerful. She wanted to know if I'd come to another dinner party. Just a small group, she said. James insists. I almost said no. The thought of being in the same room as him made my skin crawl. But then I remembered the messages. The strange warnings. The unanswered questions piling up in my head. Of course, I said, forcing my voice to sound casual. I'll be there. When I arrived, the house was already bustling with laughter and conversation. Claire greeted me at the door, pulling me into a hug. She looked radiant, as always. James appeared moments later, his smile just a little too wide, his hand resting on Claire's back like a silent warning. The night dragged on. Every time I caught James looking at me, my pulse quickened. I tried to avoid him, sticking close to Claire, but she was distracted, chatting, laughing, playing hostess. It wasn't until dessert that things took a darker turn. Claire had gone to fetch another bottle of wine, leaving me alone in the dining room. James slid into the seat next to mine, too close for comfort. You seem tense, he said, his voice low. I didn't look at him. I'm fine. His hand brushed against mine, and I flinched. You don't need to be afraid of me, Emily. My breath caught in my throat. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Unless, of course, you've got something to hide. Before I could respond, Claire's voice rang out from the kitchen. James. Can you grab the opener? He straightened, his expression unreadable. Don't worry, he murmured. Your secret's safe with me. Then he was gone, leaving me frozen in my chair. I didn't stay long after that. As soon as I could, I made an excuse, hugged Claire goodbye, and bolted for the door. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my keys. When I got home, I locked the door and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. James's words replayed in my mind, over and over. What secret did he think I had? Was he just trying to intimidate me? Or was there something else at play, something I didn't understand? I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I got another message. He's not who you think he is. This time, it came with a photo. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. The image was grainy but unmistakable, James, sitting at a cafe with a woman who wasn't Claire. They were leaning in close, their hands touching. I felt a wave of nausea. Before I could think, I called Claire. My hands trembled as the phone rang. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and warm. Emily. What's up? I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. What if this was the moment I ruined everything? Emily? Claire's tone shifted. Are you okay? I swallowed hard. Yeah, I said finally. I just wanted to check in. I hung up a minute later, feeling worse than before. I didn't tell her about the photo. Not yet. That evening, I went for a walk to clear my head. The streets were quiet, the air crisp. For the first time all day, I felt a sliver of calm. Until I noticed the car. It was parked across the street, its headlights off. At first, I thought nothing of it. But as I turned the corner, it followed. My heart started to race. I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder. The car crept along behind me, slow and deliberate. By the time I reached my apartment, I was nearly running. I fumbled with my keys, throwing one last look over my shoulder. The car had stopped at the end of the block, its engine idling. I locked the door behind me, my heart pounding. Someone was watching me. When I woke up the next morning, I told myself everything was fine. The car outside my apartment? Probably a coincidence. The messages? A prank, or maybe someone trying to mess with James for their own reasons. My paranoia had taken over, and I needed to calm down. But deep down, I didn't believe any of that. My phone buzzed while I was brushing my teeth. A text from Claire. Don't forget dinner tonight. 7 p.m. You promised. Dinner. I'd almost forgotten. Another evening at their house. Another night of forcing myself to smile while James stared at me like I was the only person in the room. For a second, I considered skipping it. I could fake a headache, say I was too busy, but then I thought of Claire. She didn't deserve to feel like I was pulling away. And maybe, just maybe, tonight would give me the answers I needed. When I arrived, the house looked as warm and welcoming as ever. Candles flickered on the dining table, soft music played in the background, and Claire was her usual glowing self, greeting me with a hug. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt it again, that unease. James appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, smiling like he owned the world. His eyes met mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Dinner started off fine. A couple of Claire's work friends were there, laughing and chatting, oblivious to the tension bubbling beneath the surface. I tried to focus on the conversation, but I could feel James watching me. Every time I looked up, his gaze lingered just a second too long. Halfway through the meal, Claire got a call. She excused herself, apologizing with a smile as she disappeared down the hallway. And that's when it happened. James leaned over, his voice low and deliberate. You look beautiful tonight, Emily. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. I mean it, he continued, his tone dripping with something I couldn't quite place. I've been thinking about you. A lot. My heart pounded. Stop, I hissed, glancing around to make sure no one else heard. But James didn't back off. He leaned in closer, his voice barely a whisper. You don't have to be scared of me. We both know Claire doesn't make you happy anymore. She doesn't understand you like I do. I shoved my chair back, the legs scraping against the floor. Excuse me, I muttered, bolting for the kitchen. I needed air. I needed space. I was gripping the edge of the counter, trying to steady my breathing, when Claire walked in. Hey, are you okay? She asked, her brow furrowed with concern. I turned to her, my heart pounding. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading. But before I could say anything, she spoke again. I need to talk to you about James, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I froze. What about him? Claire hesitated, her eyes darting to the doorway before she continued. I think he's cheating on me. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What? I managed to say, my voice trembling. I've been noticing things, she admitted, her voice shaking. He's been distant, secretive. And last week, I found a receipt for a hotel room in his jacket pocket. He swore it was for a client, but, she trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. I stared at her, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. Claire, my best friend, confiding in me about the very man who was trying to destroy our friendship. Claire, I began, my voice cracking. There's something I need to tell you. Before I could finish, James walked in, his smile as casual as ever. "Everything okay in here?" Claire wiped her eyes quickly, plastering on a fake smile. "Yeah. Just girl talk." I watched as James wrapped his arm around her, planting a kiss on her temple like nothing had happened. The room spun around me. By the time I left their house, my mind was a blur. I couldn't tell Claire what James had done, not after what she'd just told me. She was already unraveling, and the last thing she needed was more pain. But I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. When I got home, I opened my laptop and stared at the anonymous texts I'd been ignoring for days. "He's not who you think he is. Be careful who you trust. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." Whoever was sending these knew something. Something I didn't. And I was going to find out. The morning after Claire's confession, I couldn't shake the memory of James's words. "We both know Claire doesn't make you happy anymore." His audacity, his arrogance, it was suffocating. But Claire's broken voice echoed louder. "I think he's cheating on me." How could I tell her the truth without breaking her completely? And how could I stay silent knowing what I did? I barely slept that night, and when I finally did, my dreams were a chaotic mess of accusations, whispers, and shadows. When I woke up, there was a new message waiting for me. "You need to know the truth. Check his office." My heart sank. His office? I didn't even know where to begin, but the idea churned in my mind all morning. What if there was something there, proof of who he really was? Later that day, Claire invited me over for coffee. I almost declined, but I couldn't. Not when I felt like she needed me more than ever. Her smile didn't reach her eyes when she opened the door. She looked tired, almost fragile. "I just needed a break," she said, handing me a steaming cup. "From everything." We sat in the living room, making small talk, but it felt forced. Claire kept glancing toward the hallway, where James's office was. And then, as if fate was testing me, she got up. "Be right back," she said, disappearing upstairs to grab some laundry. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the message. Maybe it was the way James had been manipulating both of us. Or maybe it was the weight of Claire's pain, so heavy it felt like it might crush her at any moment. But I stood up, my legs trembling, and made my way to his office. The room smelled faintly of cologne and leather. Papers were scattered across the desk, but nothing seemed unusual at first. My hands shook as I rifled through drawers, glancing nervously at the doorway every few seconds. Then I saw it. A small, locked box tucked in the corner of the bottom drawer. My pulse quickened. I searched for a key, fumbling through his things, until finally, I found it taped to the underside of the desk. My hands trembled as I unlocked the box and opened it. Inside were photos. Dozens of them. Photos of James with different women. Some in restaurants, others in hotel rooms, their faces too close, their body language unmistakable. My stomach turned. But then, buried beneath the photos, was something worse. A picture of me. It wasn't recent. It was from years ago, back when Claire and I had first become friends. I was laughing, my arm draped casually over Claire's shoulder. James wasn't even in the picture, but his handwriting was scrawled across the back. It was always her. My blood ran cold. I shoved everything back into the box, locked it, and returned it to the drawer just as Claire called from upstairs. "Emily? Everything okay?" "Yeah." I shouted back, my voice shaking. I bolted from the office, my heart pounding in my ears. When Claire came back, she looked at me strangely. "You're pale," she said, frowning. "Are you feeling all right?" I forced a smile. "Just tired." She nodded, but her concern lingered. And so did the weight of what I'd found. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the photo of me. How long had James been watching me? Fixating on me? But the worst part was knowing that Claire had no idea. She was living with a man who had lied to her, manipulated her, and now I was certain, obsessed over her best friend. I wanted to tell her everything right then and there. But how could I? She was already unraveling, and I didn't have the courage to be the one to push her over the edge. Then, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed again. "You're in too deep. Be careful, or you'll end up like the others." The others? I stared at the screen, my heart racing. The photos flashed in my mind, the women with James, their faces blurred but their stories now hauntingly clear. Who was sending these messages? How did they know so much? And what had happened to the others? The next day, I couldn't avoid James any longer. He showed up at the cafe where I was trying to work, sliding into the seat across from me like we were old friends. "You've been busy," he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "What do you want, James?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He smirked, leaning closer. "I want you to stop pretending you're innocent. You went through my office, didn't you?" I froze. His smirk widened. "Don't look so shocked. I'm not as oblivious as Claire." "You don't scare me," I said, though my voice betrayed me with a slight tremor. "Good," he said, standing abruptly. "Because you should be scared of the truth." And then he was gone, leaving me trembling in the middle of the cafe. When I got home, there was another message waiting for me. "You need to tell her. Before it's too late." I stared at the words, my mind spinning. Too late for what? And for the first time, I wondered if whoever was sending these messages was trying to help me, or if they were just pulling me deeper into James's twisted game. I spent the entire night replaying James's words. "You should be scared of the truth." Scared? I was terrified. But not of the truth, of him. Of what he might do if he found out I wasn't backing down. The messages didn't stop either. Around midnight, another one came through. "There's more you don't know. Check your email." I didn't recognize the sender, it was an anonymous account, but the subject line read, "Proof." With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside were several photos. They showed James meeting a woman outside a hotel. Unlike the other pictures, this one was crystal clear. Her face was unmistakable. It was Claire's sister. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. I stared at the photos, my stomach twisting into knots. Claire's sister. How long had this been going on? And why hadn't Claire mentioned it when she confided in me? The email had no text, no explanation, but it didn't need one. The truth was staring me in the face. James wasn't just unfaithful, he was entangled in something that felt deeper, more calculated. I wanted to tell Claire immediately. To show her the photos and force her to see what James had been doing. But what if she didn't believe me? Or worse, what if she turned against me? I decided to wait. To think it through. The next day, Claire called me. Her voice sounded off, strained, almost defensive. "Emily," she began, hesitating. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "Of course," I said, though my heart was racing. "Are you trying to sabotage my marriage?" The question hit me like a slap. "What?" I stammered. "Claire, no. Why would you even think that?" "I don't know," she said, her tone sharp. "But James told me you've been acting strange lately. He said you've been asking questions about him, prying into our personal life." My breath caught in my throat. "Claire, that's not true." "He also said," she interrupted, "that you've been coming on to him." Her words left me speechless. "Claire," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "You know me. You know I would never do that." "I thought I did," she said, her voice breaking. "But now I'm not so sure." Before I could say anything else, she hung up. I sat there in silence, my mind racing. This was James's plan all along, to turn Claire against me, to isolate me so no one would believe me. But why? What was he so desperate to hide? I didn't have time to dwell on it because, moments later, my phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. Meet me. Tonight. 10 p.m. If you want to know the truth. The message included an address, a diner on the outskirts of town. Every instinct screamed at me to ignore it. This could be a trap, a setup by James, or worse. But the need for answers was stronger than my fear. By the time I arrived at the diner, the parking lot was nearly empty. I parked close to the entrance, my heart pounding as I stepped inside. A man was sitting in the far corner, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. He didn't look up as I approached, but when I sat down, he slid an envelope across the table. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Doesn't matter," he said, his tone flat. "What matters is what's in there." I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of documents. Bank statements, hotel receipts, emails. Each one tied James to a long string of affairs, shady business deals, and even blackmail. "He's been doing this for years," the man said, his voice low. "Claire's just another pawn in his game." "So are you." "What do you mean, me?" I asked, my throat tightening. "You think he just noticed you one day? That this all happened by chance?" The man shook his head. "He's been watching you. Planning this." "Why?" I demanded, my voice rising. The man leaned closer, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were dark, filled with something I couldn't quite place, fear, maybe. "Because you're not the first," he said. "And if you don't stop him, you won't be the last." When I got home, I locked every door and window, my mind racing. I didn't know who the man was or why he'd decided to help me, but the evidence he'd given me was undeniable. James wasn't just a cheater. He was dangerous. Manipulative. And somehow, I was caught in his web. Another message came through that night, but this one was different. "You're running out of time." By now, my life felt like it was unraveling thread by thread. Every step I took seemed to lead me deeper into a maze I didn't know how to escape. The next morning, I went to Claire's house. I had decided to come clean about everything, the messages, the photos, even the meeting with the stranger. If she didn't believe me, at least I'd know I'd tried. When Claire opened the door, her face was pale, her eyes red. It looked like she hadn't slept all night. "Emily," she said quietly, stepping aside to let me in. "We need to talk." For a moment, I thought this was my chance. I could tell her everything, and maybe, just maybe, she'd finally see the truth. But as soon as I stepped into the living room, my heart dropped. Sitting on the couch was James. I froze. "Claire, what's going on?" I asked, my voice shaking. Claire crossed her arms and looked at me with an expression I didn't recognize, cold, almost accusing. "James told me everything," she said. I glanced at him. He was calm, collected, as if he had already won. "Claire, whatever he told you, it's a lie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I came here to tell you the truth." "Stop," Claire snapped, her voice cracking. "I've heard enough of your lies. I trusted you, Emily. You were my best friend. And all this time, you've been trying to tear my marriage apart." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Claire, listen to me, James has been manipulating you. He's been manipulating both of us. I have proof." "Proof?" James interrupted, standing up. His voice was smooth, almost mocking. "Is this about those photos? The ones you conveniently received from an anonymous source?" I opened my mouth to respond, but he didn't give me the chance. "Emily," he continued, "don't you think it's suspicious that you're the one who keeps finding all this evidence? First, the messages. Then the photos. And now you want Claire to believe I'm some sort of mastermind?" He laughed, shaking his head. "James, stop," I said, my voice rising. "I know what you've been doing. You've been lying to Claire, using her, manipulating her. Enough. Claire shouted, cutting me off. The room fell silent. Emily, she said, her voice trembling, I don't know what's going on with you. But if you ever cared about me, you'll leave us alone. For good. Her words felt like a slap. Claire, I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. You don't understand. He's dangerous. No, she said firmly, her voice breaking. The only dangerous person here is you. I left the house feeling completely shattered. Claire was gone, at least, the Claire I thought I knew. I couldn't go home. Not yet. I needed air, space to think. So I drove aimlessly, trying to make sense of everything. That's when my phone buzzed. Another message. You missed something. Check the photos again. I pulled over and opened the email from the night before, scrolling through the photos of James and Claire's sister. At first, nothing stood out. But then I saw it, a detail I'd missed the first time. In one of the photos, there was another figure in the background, partially obscured. I zoomed in, my heart pounding. It was Claire. She wasn't supposed to be there. She had told me she'd been out of town when the photo was taken. But there she was, standing just a few feet away from James and her sister, watching them. The realization hit me like a freight train. Claire knew. She'd known all along about James and her sister. But instead of confronting them, she had turned on me. Why? What was she hiding? As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. It's not just James. They're both playing you. Both? I stared at the message, my mind racing. Was it possible Claire and James were in this together? But why would she do that? I needed answers, and I needed them now. That night, I went back to the diner where I'd met the stranger. I didn't expect him to be there, but I was desperate for any clue, any lead. To my surprise, he was waiting for me. I told you not to trust her, he said as I sat down. What do you mean? I demanded. What's Claire's role in all of this? He hesitated, looking around nervously. Claire's not innocent, he said finally. She's been covering for James. But that's not the worst part. What is? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He leaned in, his expression deadly serious. She's been feeding him information about you. Every message you've sent her, every word you've said, she's been using it against you. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Why? I asked, my voice cracking. Why would she do that? The man hesitated again before answering. Because she doesn't just blame James for what's happening. She blames you. I couldn't breathe. My heart felt like it was pounding in my ears, drowning out everything around me. I sat there, staring at the stranger, his words still ringing in my mind. She blames you. I tried to hold myself together, but it was becoming too much. Claire had known. She had been feeding James information about me. And what's worse, she had been using my own words, my trust, as a weapon. Why? Why would she do this to me? The stranger's eyes were sharp, calculating. She's been setting you up, he continued, his voice low. Claire's been pulling the strings behind the scenes, letting James play his game while she stayed in the shadows. But it's all a game. A game that you've been the pawn in. I shook my head, unable to process what he was saying. I felt nauseous. I don't understand. Why would Claire do this? The man leaned in closer. Because of something that happened a long time ago. A betrayal that's been eating at her. And you were part of it, Emily. You were the one who changed everything for her. His words hit me like a cold wave. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice trembling. He paused, then glanced at me with a knowing look. You and Claire. You think you've always been friends, right? But the truth is, you've always been a threat to her. I couldn't take it anymore. No, I said, standing up. This doesn't make any sense. I need answers, real answers. The stranger didn't argue. He just stood there, watching me. And then he said something that stopped me dead in my tracks. Do you remember the night you took something from her? I froze. My mind raced. The night I took something from her? What was he talking about? My thoughts jumped to the past, to every moment I could remember with Claire. But I couldn't find anything that could explain this. I don't know what you mean, I whispered, feeling sick to my stomach. The stranger's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something darker in them. You don't remember? The night you stole her chance. The one thing she always wanted. My head spun. What was he talking about? You've always had everything Claire wanted, he continued. Her dreams, her happiness. She's always been second place to you, Emily. You took the one thing that she thought would make everything right. The one thing she'd wanted her whole life. I felt dizzy. What are you talking about? The man's expression softened, almost pitying. James. You took James from her, and she never forgave you. It hit me like a punch to the gut. My stomach churned. James. The man I had fallen for, the man Claire had fallen for. It had been years ago, back in college. Claire had been infatuated with James, but he had chosen me. We had always laughed about it. It had never seemed like a big deal. It had been so long ago. But now, in the silence of that moment, I realized how deeply Claire had been affected by it. She never forgave me. The man looked at me as if he could read my thoughts. She's been using James to get back at you. She knew about your feelings for him, and she used that against you all along. But it wasn't just about him. It was about making you feel like you didn't deserve anything. I stumbled back, trying to make sense of everything. The betrayal, the lies. Everything I thought I knew about my friendship with Claire was starting to crumble. I thought I knew Claire. I thought I knew everything about her, about us. But I had no idea how deep this wound went. I had always believed she was my best friend, the one person who would never hurt me. But what if that had never been true? What if all this time, she had been pretending to be the supportive friend while secretly plotting her revenge? I needed to confront Claire. I couldn't let this go on any longer. But something in my gut told me that wasn't going to be easy. The next day, I went to Claire's apartment. I had to talk to her. I had to know the truth. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, almost caught off guard. Emily, what are you doing here? She asked, her voice tight. I didn't waste any time. I know what you've been doing. I know everything. Her face went pale. For a moment, I thought she was going to deny it, to keep playing the victim. But then, a dark look passed over her face. So, you finally figured it out, she said, her voice eerily calm. I stared at her. Why, Claire? Why would you do this to me? She looked at me with a strange, almost pitying smile. Because you took everything from me. You think it was just about James? It's never been about him. It's about the years of pretending to be happy for you. It's about how you've always had everything, and I've always been in your shadow. You were always the one who got what you wanted, while I got left behind. The pain in her voice was undeniable, but it didn't change the fact that she had manipulated everything, James, the messages, even my own life, just to get back at me. And in that moment, something in me shifted. I realized that the friendship I thought we shared was nothing more than a lie. I never knew, I whispered, more to myself than to her. Claire's smile widened, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was a smile of triumph. I know, she said, stepping closer. And that's the saddest part, Emily. You never knew what you were walking into. I turned to leave, but Claire's next words stopped me. Don't think you're the only one with a secret, Emily, she called after me. The truth isn't over yet. I thought I had all the answers. I thought I finally understood Claire, or at least, I thought I understood why she'd been pushing me away all these years. But after that conversation at her apartment, I realized I knew nothing. Nothing at all. I couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was lurking beneath the surface. Claire's words echoed in my mind, "Don't think you're the only one with a secret, Emily." What did she mean by that? I had to find out. But where to even begin? I spent days replaying everything in my mind, every word, every look, every moment with Claire and James. They all seemed like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. And then, one night, as I was going through some old messages on my phone, I found something. A single text message that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't from James. It wasn't from Claire. It was from an unknown number. "It's time to know the truth. Claire's been playing both sides. Don't trust her. It's all connected to something much bigger." My heart raced as I read those words over and over again. Who was this? And why were they telling me all this? I couldn't just sit back anymore. I had to confront Claire again. But something in my gut told me this time would be different. She wasn't just hiding the truth about James and me, there was something else. Something far more sinister. The next day, I called her. She didn't answer. I sent a message, but the response was immediate and cold, "I'm busy. Don't contact me again." My stomach dropped. Claire had always been open with me. This sudden distance, the sharp edge in her words, it was more than just anger. Something had shifted, and I could feel it. It was time to dig deeper. I went to Claire's apartment later that night, unannounced. My heart pounded as I knocked on the door. I half expected her to slam it in my face, but when she opened it, her expression was different, almost guarded. "Emily," she said, her voice tight, but not with the same warmth I was used to. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice steady despite the rush of anxiety inside me. "I need to know everything. No more lies." Her eyes flickered for a moment, and then she stepped aside, allowing me in. But something felt off. We sat in silence for a moment, and for the first time in years, it felt like we weren't friends at all. I looked at her, trying to read her, but all I saw was a wall. Finally, she spoke. "You really want the truth?" "Yes," I said, meeting her gaze. "I need to know why you've been doing all this." Claire sighed, looking away. "It's not what you think, Emily. It was never just about you and James." I felt a knot form in my stomach. Then what was it about? "Because I don't understand anymore, Claire." She paused, and then, with a tremor in her voice, she said, "I wasn't always like this. I didn't want to be this person. But, you left me with no choice." I leaned forward, my breath catching. "What do you mean?" Claire's eyes darkened. "I tried to move on. I tried to be happy. But you took everything from me, Emily. I thought if I played along, if I just kept pretending, things would get better. But they didn't." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "What are you talking about?" Claire's next words were a bombshell. "It wasn't just James. It was you. You took something from me a long time ago, and I've never forgiven you for it." I froze, the weight of her words crashing down on me. "What are you talking about?" I repeated, this time more softly, more afraid. Claire turned away, as if wrestling with her thoughts. "You don't remember, do you? The night you stole everything I had?" My head spun. "What are you saying?" She slowly turned back to face me. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. "It was the night of your graduation party. James, he told me he loved me. He was my boyfriend before you even knew he existed, Emily. And that night, you took him from me. He chose you. And I couldn't handle it. Not then. And not now." My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't known. I hadn't realized it had been that deep for her. I had thought it was a silly crush, something that Claire had gotten over. But I'd been wrong. I couldn't process it. But that was years ago. Why would you destroy our friendship over something like that? Claire's laugh was bitter. You think it was just about James? You think it was that simple? It was never about him, Emily. It was about you always being in the spotlight, always having everything. It was about you taking the one thing I thought was mine and making it look so effortless. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was drowning in the truth, her truth. She had held on to this resentment, this bitterness for so long, and I had never known. But then, Claire said something that completely shattered me. There's more you don't know. James, he's not the man you think he is. I stared at her, speechless. What do you mean? Claire's voice dropped to a whisper. It's not just the cheating. It's much worse. He's been manipulating us both. And the worst part is, he's been playing you, Emily. Every step of the way. The texts, the games, he's the one pulling the strings. And I've been too scared to tell you the truth. I felt my world tilt. My breath came in shallow gasps. James? Was everything I had believed about him, about us, just a lie? I don't understand, I said, my voice cracking. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because, Claire whispered, I wasn't sure who to trust. And I didn't want you to see him for what he really is. You deserve the truth, but not all of it. That was when I realized. Claire wasn't just a victim in this twisted web. She had been complicit in it all. And now, her confession had only left me more lost than ever. I had to know the truth, but every answer only led to more questions. I had to confront James. There was no going back now. I couldn't believe what Claire had just told me. My mind was reeling. James, the man I thought I knew, the man I thought I trusted, had been manipulating us both? The truth was worse than I ever could have imagined. Every moment, every smile, every gesture now felt like a lie. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront him. No more games, no more secrets. I had to hear it from his mouth. I had to know the full truth, even if it destroyed me. I found myself outside his office building that evening, pacing back and forth. My hands were trembling. I had spent hours planning what I was going to say, but now, as I stood there, all of it seemed meaningless. There was no script for this. There was no way to prepare for the storm that was coming. I glanced at my phone, checking the time. 7:45 p.m. He should be finishing up any minute now. I took a deep breath and forced my legs to move. I stepped inside the building and made my way to the elevator. When I reached his office, I could hear the soft hum of voices behind the door. He wasn't alone. I hesitated, unsure if I should go in. My heart hammered in my chest. But I didn't have time for hesitation anymore. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I knocked. James opened the door, his usual charming smile plastered on his face. But the moment his eyes met mine, something shifted. The smile faltered, just for a second. Emily, he said, his voice tight, as though he had been expecting me. What are you doing here? I didn't waste any time. I know everything, James. I know what you've been doing. I know the truth. His expression didn't change, but his eyes grew colder. What truth? He asked, a slight edge to his voice. The texts. The lies. The manipulation, I shot back. I know you've been playing both Claire and me. I know what you're capable of. For a moment, he said nothing. The silence between us was deafening. Then, finally, he sighed, almost in mockery, and leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. You really think you know everything, don't you? Don't play games, James, I said, stepping closer. I know you're the one behind the anonymous texts. You've been stirring the pot, trying to turn Claire against me and manipulate everything. I know you're the one who's been feeding her lies about me, His eyes darkened. "You're wrong," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think Claire doesn't know what's going on? She's been part of this from the start. You think I'd go to all this trouble just for fun? It was her idea, Emily. She's been playing you just as much as I have." I froze. "What are you talking about?" James smirked. "Claire didn't tell you the whole story, did she? She's been in on it from the beginning. She knew exactly what she was doing." I felt my stomach drop. The ground beneath me seemed to tilt. Everything I thought I knew was turning into a nightmare. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "You're lying." He stepped closer, his voice dripping with venom. "Am I? Do you really think she's been innocent in all this? She has her own reasons, Emily. And they're not as pretty as you think." I could feel the weight of his words crushing me. My mind was spinning. What was real? What was a lie? I had trusted Claire. I had trusted her more than anyone in the world. But what if everything I thought I knew about her had been a lie? Suddenly, the door to his office opened behind him. And there she was. Claire. I didn't even have time to react. She stepped in, her face pale, her eyes wide. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was as though time had stopped. Then Claire spoke, her voice trembling. "You're right, Emily. James didn't lie about everything." I looked at her, horrified. "What are you saying?" She took a deep breath, avoiding my gaze. "I was a part of it. All of it. I knew James was playing games with you, and I didn't stop him. I didn't want to." Her voice cracked. "I didn't want you to have everything, Emily. I wanted to see you lose. I wanted you to feel what I've felt all these years." My legs almost gave way beneath me. Claire had been a part of it too. She had known everything. And worse, she had been the one to help James tear us apart. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. "Why?" I whispered, barely able to get the word out. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look at me. "Because you always had everything, Emily. You had the perfect life, the perfect friends. And I was always in your shadow. Always the one left behind." I felt sick. All those years of friendship, all the love and trust one had given her, it had all been a lie. I couldn't process it. You wanted me to lose?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes," she said softly. "I wanted you to feel what I felt all this time." She paused and looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "And then, when I saw how James was treating you, I realized. I hated myself for it. I hated myself for letting it get this far. But it was too late. I couldn't stop it. I felt my heart breaking. My best friend. The one person I had trusted more than anyone else in this world. She had been the one pulling the strings all along. And now, as I looked at her, I didn't know who she was anymore." James's voice cut through the silence. "So, now you know, Emily. Now you know why everything has been falling apart. You thought Claire was your friend, but she's been playing you from the start." I turned to Claire, my hands trembling. "Is it true? Did you really want to destroy me?" Her eyes were filled with guilt and sorrow, but there was something else there too. Something I hadn't expected. "I did," she whispered. "But now I can't undo what I've done. And I don't know if you'll ever forgive me for it." I didn't know what to say. My whole world had crumbled in an instant. The two people I thought I could trust had turned on me. And the worst part was, I had no idea what would happen next. All I knew was that there was no going back. The truth was out, and there was nothing left but the aftermath. I never imagined that this is how it would end. For so long, I thought I had control over my life, over my friendships, over everything I held dear. But now, as I stand here, staring at the shattered pieces of my world, I realize how wrong I was. I thought Claire and James had betrayed me. I thought they were the puppeteers, pulling the strings of my life, controlling me from behind the scenes. But the truth, the final, shocking truth, was far darker than anything I had imagined. I couldn't believe the words Claire had just said. She had been a part of it all along. Not just playing me, but playing James, too. She wasn't just jealous or vengeful, she was twisted. She had a vendetta that went deeper than I could ever have imagined. Her tears meant nothing now. Her apologies were just words, empty, meaningless words. And yet, as much as I wanted to hate her, to push her away forever, there was still a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that I was part of the reason she had become like this. But I couldn't dwell on that now. I had to focus on the bigger picture, the one final secret that had been hidden from me. James wasn't the mastermind. I had been wrong all this time. The one person I had trusted, the one person I thought I knew better than anyone, had been the one orchestrating everything. I turned to face him now, his expression cold and calculating. The man who had been my friend, my confidant, who had comforted me when I was upset, who had shared my joys and sorrows, had played me like a fool from the very start. And now it was time to face the consequences. "Emily," James says, his voice low and dangerous, "you've been asking the wrong questions." "What are you talking about?" I ask, my voice trembling, though I do my best to steady it. My heart is pounding in my chest. "You've been focused on Claire, on the lies she fed you. But the real story, the real game, was never about her." His eyes gleam with something cold. Something that makes my skin crawl. "It was always about you, Emily." My heart stops. "What?" I barely whisper the word. "From the moment you walked into our lives, I knew exactly what I was doing." "You think Claire was the only one who had reasons for what happened? You think it was just about jealousy?" It wasn't. James steps closer, his presence suffocating. "You were always the one I needed to control. You were always the prize I was after." The air around me feels thick, suffocating. I want to move, to run, to escape from this nightmare, but my feet feel frozen to the ground. "You." I whisper, but my voice fails me. "You manipulated me. You played me just like you played her." "Exactly." He smiles, and it's not a smile of triumph, it's a smile that cuts deeper than any betrayal. "You thought you were in control, but you were never in control, Emily. I made sure of that." I'm in disbelief. How could I have been so blind? How could I have trusted him, trusted them both? They weren't the friends I thought they were. They were something darker. Something far more dangerous. As I stand there, feeling the weight of his words, the realization hits me, everything I thought I knew was a lie. The texts, the manipulation, the gaslighting, all of it was orchestrated by James, not Claire. She had been his pawn, just like I had been. Why? The question escapes me before I can stop it. "Why did you do this?" James shrugs, his expression unreadable. "Why not? You were always the perfect target. You trusted people too easily, believed the best in them, even when they didn't deserve it. It was easy to get you where I wanted you. You were the one who walked into the trap, Emily." I feel sick. My vision blurs as the pieces of the puzzle finally come together. "But why Claire?" I ask, my voice hoarse. Claire was just a means to an end. She was never the real target. I knew she'd fall for it. She's always been a little unstable. But you, Emily, you were different. You were always too good to be true. I needed to break you." I stagger backward, the weight of his words suffocating me. But then, something inside me snaps. I can't take it anymore. I can't stand here and let him win. I turn to Claire, who is standing silently in the corner, her face a mask of guilt and regret. I can see the pain in her eyes, but it doesn't matter anymore. "You knew," I whisper to her, my voice trembling with anger and heartbreak. "You knew, and you didn't stop him. You were a part of this. You let it happen." Claire's eyes fill with tears, but her face hardens. I didn't know it would go this far, she says softly, her voice breaking. I didn't know he would do this. The words are empty. They mean nothing now. I turn back to James. I'm done with you. For the first time, I see a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. But it's too late. I know the truth now. I know everything. And I won't let him have power over me anymore. But just as I think I'm free, just as I think the worst is over, James pulls out a small, sleek phone and dials a number. It's done, he says into the phone, his voice low. My blood runs cold. A moment later, the door bursts open. A figure steps inside, someone I didn't expect. It's someone I know. Someone who has been watching me from the shadows this whole time. And as the truth unravels further, I realize that this nightmare isn't over. It's only just begun.